world building process versus on this versus say Sandman or Batman or Batwoman or any of that stuff is quite different, because those things have a built-in iconography already that I can rely on. I can just like, oh, I know exactly what to do with that. Here's my take on it. Where with this, everything is from scratch. So that takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And then, like I was saying earlier, the landscape format from a work standpoint is way more challenging than I had anticipated. So the pages take me a long time to illustrate, more than I would like, but it is what it is. You know?
Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. I am back here with Mr. J.H. Williams III. So he's back on the show to talk about his new comic Echolands with W. Hayden Blackman, which is coming out on August 25th, 2021. Welcome back, Mr. Williams.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
My first question is, very quickly, can you describe Echolands? I know the last time we talked, you gave a very brief NDA-friendly description of it.
It's, I guess the best way to say is like the elevator pitch essentially is Hope Red Hood steals a gem from a despotic wizard that will lead to Earth's last war. It's a genre mashup series where you could have, black and white comics style monsters, vampires next to Western gunslingers, next to biker Huns, next to cyborg elves, and so on and so on and so on. None of the things that we've chosen for it are arbitrary. So when people read it and they see just how much of a mashup reality this is, there's probably going to have a lot of questions about it. But the result, when we finally reveal the secret of the Echolands, there's a reason for everything. And it all makes sense, believe it or not. So.
What was the inspiration behind Echolands, aside from you creating a mechanism where you can draw anything you wanted to?
I guess it started out as, Hayden and I getting to know each other years and years and years ago. And we did a short story for Hellboy Weird Tales together that, we both liked the collaborativeness of that. And so I mentioned to him I had this idea sort of centered around this character I created as a kid. And so that started the conversation about what it should be and how to build it. And so it the inspiration initially was just me wanting to do something with this character I created as a kid that I've always wanted to do. It's kind of like a little bit of a self-indulgent dream come true kind of thing, where you're taking this thing that you've always lived in your head for as long as you can remember, practically, and seeing if you can actually make it into something. And the result is, through Hayden and I's development of the project, it's turned into quite this elaborate thing, an expansive story that I think people will be able to really find a lot to get into, because it's so diverse, a wide-ranging cast. I know, it's just like, it's something I've always wanted to do. Now, on a more challenging note, is as we started talking about it, we hadn't really thought about the format until a few years into figuring out the outline. So we spent a lot of time developing the outline for this thing, knowing what we want to do from A to Z with it. And then I started thinking about the format, and I wanted to try something that I hadn't done before, just to see what it would do for the project. and that was making it landscape. So particularly because I work in double page spreads so much, when we say landscape, it's like this.
Yeah.
It's extra wide. It's not just page by page landscape, it's double page spreads landscape. The result is, because the story's so epic, and by choosing that landscape format, it really suits the project very well. But it's certainly a very distinct, difficult challenge.
I'll get back to that in a bit, but you were saying that you've had the story in your head for a very long time. How long is a very long time?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say the full story was in my head since I was a kid. Bits and pieces of what we've done were in my head.
Mm-hmm.
I knew what the villain was going to be. I knew the protagonist, Hope Red Hood. Some of the peripheral characters that are going to show up had some sort of original idea from when I was a kid. I have drawings of a lot of that stuff still. Maybe if this thing's successful enough, people will like seeing those, like printed in a collected edition, showing like these really bad drawings from when I was a kid, used for that. So some of the elements there was like germination of ideas. I knew I wanted it to be, I don't want to say post-apocalyptic, but I knew I wanted it to be a future where things were in upheaval. So I had those kinds of things going on in my head. But the big secret behind Echolands that becomes the driving engine of everything we've come up with, that was new, I think, between conversations with Hayden and I had a loose idea of what it was. And then I think I remember when I said it to him, I'm like, it's this. And he's like, oh, that's such a cool idea. And then it sparked his imagination greatly, particularly because, he's a video game designer and stuff. And so he likes the world building aspect. And he and I both could see that it was a unique concept that I think when people see it, they're going to go back and reread stuff in the series when we reveal it. And they're like, oh, okay, it was there all
Yes, it was
along.
You planted those seeds.
Yeah, which is fun, super fun.
Well, I've seen some of these art books and artists showing these old drawings, and what you guys call your bad drawings from when you were a kid is already great to most people. So this is interesting to me because the last time we spoke, we noticed when we called out that you do work on a lot of books with female protagonists, and you said back then that you didn't mean for your career to go that way, it just ended up going that way. But now here you are saying that you had a concept for this and you always had a female protagonist in mind. So why Hope Red Hood? Why Little Red Riding
I don't know. I don't know if the aspects of that fantasy or not fantasy, but fairy tale connotation to her name was there when I was a kid. I knew visually what she was. She always had the red hood and red cloak. Pretty much the way I'm drawing her now is the way I always envisioned this character from when I was a kid. I knew I wanted to call her Hope for a long time. But when I was a kid, I don't think I had an actual name for her. I just kind of was more about the big idea, you know what I mean? And was plugging in all these characters, not thinking of, some of them had names or some of them had conceptual names. But I think, in terms of her roundness as a character came more to life later.
And you've been
in terms of being a female character, I don't know where that came from when I was a kid, honestly, other than maybe it was born out of some of the comics I would read, where I would find some of the female characters more interesting than the male characters. I don't know
You got any
why.
off the top of your head?
Jean Grey, great example. You know,
That
she
is a
was
great
an
example.
intriguing character. You
Yeah.
know, Marionette from the Micronauts, intriguing character. You know, here
Yeah.
was this princess character that was this total badass. You know, so I don't know if some of those things, some of those things, you know, kind of just sunk in subconsciously, or even Storm. You know,
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. My go-to example for that is Adam and Alana Strange.
Yeah.
And so you've been working on Echolands for a decade. So you've spoken about how, you know, the concept has changed once you started talking to Hayden. But what about since then? Because you guys have been working on this for a decade. How has the story changed since then?
It didn't. The biggest changes that happened since then didn't really start until we actually started working on it and writing scripts. You know, what we had a full outline. We knew exactly what we wanted from A to Z. We knew what was going to be the big character arc for Hope, what was going to happen to her at the beginning versus where she ends up. We know what her childhood was and how that plays a role in some of her decisions, that kind of stuff. So all that existed for a long time. The more recent changes happened when we started writing scripts and started thinking about some of the peripheral casts that we introduced early on originally weren't going to play as big of a role as they do now. So, and that is less obvious in the first chapter versus the second chapter. The second chapter really takes off in terms of the broader cast. So the first chapter is just mainly focused on Hope and what she's done and her friend, lover, Core. But we are and another character named Rabbit. We're briefly introduced to a peripheral cast towards the end of the issue, but then that all really takes off in chapter 2 when we, in the writing process, started to realize, oh no, all these characters, they need to have a bigger role, and the result is something better than what we originally conceived for the big picture. Yeah, there's been a lot of interesting things just come up because we're like, oh, well, we're going to do this with this character. Well, what if this happens to them? You know, what does that mean? And so on, which weren't originally in the outline, which is fascinating.
Is that like, that's one of the best parts? That's got to be one of the best parts of collaboration, right? When it just kind of takes on a life of its own.
Yeah. And sometimes, you know, even when we were working on Batwoman or other things I've worked on that haven't been published yet, it's sort of like at some point the characters start to tell you what's going to happen to them, who they are, and you have to, you know, listen to that carefully without it getting in the way of what your overall objective is. But you have to also be willing to hear what they are telling you and follow that to some extent. So the characters become alive, they become real, and they start to tell you what they are. As an example, you know, there was a concept I was thinking about before the pandemic happened that I knew was supposed to be about such and such character, but I was trying to figure out that character, and that character had a partner. And for me to figure out that other character, the partner told me about him. Literally, I'm driving home from like the comic shop or whatever, and the side character starts to tell me about this character I'm trying to figure out. So he's like talking to me. That's how they become alive and become real. It's pretty interesting.
Very interesting. Like that's the kind of magic of creating fiction. You started working on this 10 years ago, and as we all know, you got sidetracked with Sandman Overture, which even your publisher told you to go do ahead.
Yeah.
Did anything change in the process of that? Like, did that inform your creative decisions when you got back to Echolands?
No, I don't think so, because we had always intended to have Echolands be the next thing after Batwoman. And then, like you said, Overture came up. I don't think anything really changed in terms of how we're constructing it. It's just a ton of work ultimately, and I wasn't prepared for that. And then, like, life things happened to me during that time. Really, some of it catastrophic. I almost died 3 times. It took me a year, probably a year or so, to recover. I still have fallout from that with certain physical aspects of my life. Then we had the Vegas shooting occur. I live here in Vegas. So my wife and I ended up curating where we live. That took over a year of our lives. Then I had other weird little things, like I was contracted for Amazon to do an illustrated Bram Stoker's Dracula. So I had to do 50 illustrations for that. So there was like all these little other things that kept happening over the last 5 years that, maybe 4 years, that kind of kept coming into play. So it was like this, almost like it felt like a bit of a struggle, because we would start work, then something would happen. We would start work, then something would happen. And that kept going on and on and on. And it almost started to feel like, is this? And then with the work being so difficult, because it's like the world building process versus say Sandman or Batman or Batwoman or any of that stuff is quite different, because those things have a built-in iconography already that I can rely on. I can just like, oh, I know exactly what to do with that. Here's my take on it. Where with this, everything is from scratch. So that takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And then, like I was saying earlier, the landscape format from a work standpoint is way more challenging than I had anticipated. So the pages take me a long time to illustrate, more than I would like, but it is what it is.
Is that Dracula Book Out?
It is a digital version only for some reason. Amazon did this series of classics where they commissioned a bunch of different classics from various illustrators, where they did this thing where I don't know even what they call it, but they would take the pieces of art and add little animations to them. So as you're reading it, so like say if there is as an example, if there's a character holding a candle, the candle will flicker, or a little stream of steam or smoke come off of it. And so that's what that ended up being. I kept hoping that they would eventually do a print version, because I think it'd be super cool. And I treated the artwork in that like it was more inspired by Hammer horror films than the old black and white stuff. So I relied on a lot of color, because those those Hammer horror films have so much color in them. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to approach it that way. That was a super fun project to do, and particularly because, like, with Dracula, what isn't shown much in any film adaptations is how diverse his visual is in the book. He never appears the same way twice in the book. He constantly is morphing, and so that was kind of fun. Like every time I got to draw him, or paint him rather, it was a completely different idea of that, so it was super fun to do. I was really surprised they asked me to do it.
That's very cool. I hope they do print it one day. Getting back to Echolands, you say that Sandman, Batman, Batwoman, you had a built-in iconography. So is it more like Promethea?
Yes. Yeah. I'd say the work level is very similar to Promethea. where Promethea was very, very time consuming. The difference is I had, for the most of Promethea, I had an inker, where this is, I'm doing it all. And
Yeah.
working in the writing seat as well. So the other difference between this and Promethea is a lot of Image comics. What's so fun about a lot of Image comics, a good chunk of them offer like interesting back matter materials per issue. And so we're doing that with this as well.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, so the back matter is very story relevant. So as what I mean by that, each chapter, as an example, each chapter has a snippet of an interview with the main villain that's done for a magazine called The Echo. And so you get little snippets and you learn a lot about the Echolands from that interview, and a lot about what drives the villain. And there's like nice little clues and hints in there to the bigger picture of what's actually happening, and how that might come into play with the main cast as they're trying to survive him. So
Very cool. Is the villain somebody that we would recognize? Like,
no, I don't think so.
Okay, because I was gonna be like, can we actually do a whodunit with Echolands?
Oh no, the villain is when it'll be very obvious who the villain is, and the people that work with him. He's a super interesting character, and his arc is going to be interesting too. Hopefully people will be surprised what we end up doing with him, because at first he seems just a straight up evil dude, but then as you learn more about him, there's going to be a lot more depth to him than people think. So
you have, no pun intended, the dream team back on this one, Todd Klein and Dave Stewart.
yeah,
How important was it to get these two guys? Because we're talking about the greatest letterer of all time.
That's right.
And
exactly.
And one of the greatest colorists of all time.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was of utmost importance to me. And it didn't seem like an odd choice at all, because we'd already been doing so much work together. I mean, Todd and I have been working together for the bulk of my career at this point. And he's always, what's so great about Todd isn't just how good of a letterer he is, it's how he approaches the lettering process. He's open to trying different things. So as an example of that, I mean, you can look at all the diversity of lettering he did on Promethea, but then when I did Desolation Jones shortly after Promethea, I was like, hey, can we try this with the lettering? Like a slightly different change, which brought a different flavor to the entire project. That when you make that kind of decision, it affects how everything feels. And he was completely open to that. And so just sticking to a standard. And we've done the same thing here. So the lettering style, which you've seen in the sample pages, is different than what a typical comic would be sitting next to it. And it's interesting that we've chosen to use squarish balloons rather than the ovals or round balloons. And it's interesting that we've chosen that because it's landscaped. So it almost feels like, oh yeah, of course you're going to choose rectangular balloons because you're doing a different page setup. So it's pretty cool.
Do you and Todd ever? So when I spoke to Mick Gray, he was basically saying how you were like a film director. You were calling all of the shots. You wanted to make sure that things look a certain way. But Todd is also known for, being very hands-on with design work and everything. You guys ever have creative conflicts about what would go into a particular design, like maybe the covers or anything?
No. Todd, he is he obviously respects my point of view as a designer, because I have to think about that so much with the pages. And if there's ever anything that I've thought about and kind of threw at him saying, hey, let's try this, if he's thought like, oh, that might not work. He'll be honest with me about that. But that's a very rare occasion. He usually tends to try to make it work the way I see it. The only thing I can think of is because he likes what I'm suggesting. In terms of balloon placements, I decide where all that goes, which is unusual. Usually a letterer will, or an editor will make those decisions, but I tend to control a lot of that because my pages are so orchestrated and constructed in a weird way that I have to think about that. And so I send him balloon placements, which he doesn't have any complaints about. If he sees something that doesn't work, he usually won't say, he won't ask me about it. He'll just make a change that he thinks does work and just send it and let me see it, and usually in those instances, he's right. So as far as, my relationship with Dave Stewart, getting him is a must. He and I, ever since Seven Soldiers of Victory, I guess, is where we really partnered up. We've just stuck together ever since then. For the most part, there's been a thing here or there where he didn't color it because of whatever reason, but then he made a decision to just, if I'm asking him to do it, he's going to say yes. So that's very gratifying that he appreciates our rapport in that way, where he likes working with me and I like working with him. We're very good friends now, and he's so integral to any project, not just with me, but with anyone he's doing, because he's so good.
That's true.
And the thing I like about working with Dave is because, especially on a genre mashup book, I mean, come on, he's like, there's all kinds of different things that you have to consider, even with the color. Like, for, this character needs to be colored differently than the character standing next to it. And he's easy to talk to about that, and he's open to those ideas. He loves being able to experiment if he can.
How much input do you have on the color palette? Do you dictate to Dave what the color palette should be, or does he figure it out and then get back to you?
I tend to write notes for each page, but usually those notes are specific to, hey, pay attention to this. This needs to be such and such, or pay attention to that. This needs to be such and such, or I did this because of this was in my head. Color palettes. There was a time where I would offer more suggestions about that. I don't offer as many suggestions about color palettes now. What tends to happen, particularly with the genre mashup world, is kind of hard to pinpoint a scene to be a specific palette, unless if we have an issue in issue 5 where all the characters finally get a respite, and I did make a suggestion there to, can we do something that's like tonally cool, a cool down palette, you know what I mean? Or to change a palette when you move from this set of characters to this set of characters, we could change the palette that way. But sometimes I don't know what that palette should be. So after I send him the pages with all the notes, we'll even go over it on the phone before he starts. In case if he has questions, or if I have questions. So we'll go through page by page. So as an example of what I mean, the latest issue he's going to start coloring, there's a scene where these characters find themselves in an underwater grotto. So they're under the ocean. They swim up through this statue and find themselves in a grotto that has open air, even though they're submerged under the ocean. So like a pocket of air. But all the stuff in there is kind of strange. And when I drew it, I kind of had like, I don't know what the color should be. I mean, so I was like, so that's the sort of thing where I'm like, hey, Dave, what do you think? This is
Mm,
what this is my initial thing. What I was thinking, like there's these weird creatures in here. I'm like, those creatures, they're glowing. That's all I know. But what color are they glowing? You know, that sort of stuff. And we'll talk it out and come up to, a conclusion together, which is super collaborative.
did you so sometimes I look at your I've got Absolute Sandman Overture, so if I flip to the back I can see your black and white art, but sometimes you'll sprinkle a color in there. So when do you make
Yeah.
that decision that you're the one who's going to put in the color?
I don't know. I think it depends on what I'm trying to get out of it. So in Sandman Overture, there was different scenes where I either did my own digital color because I wanted something so specific, and it wouldn't be fair to Dave to make him go round and round with me because it's not coming across the way I see it in my head. That's just
Okay.
not fair, right? So if there's something very, very specific that I'm looking for, I'll do that part myself and fuss with it myself and go through different iterations until I go, yep, that's it right there. So I go around with myself instead of making him do that. Or there's things where I'm like, no, that sequence or that character has to be paint, not digital color, but hands on the board paint. Um, and I do that sometimes because I want that to have a very specific feel that, you know, you can a lot of times can tell when something is painted on the board or by hand versus digital paint. And again, I kind of feel like if I was telling Dave, oh no, I want that to look like an oil painting. Can you do that for me, please? That's not fair to him either, right? It's because you're putting so much of the burden on him, and not you're putting the burden on him to meet my vision rather
Yeah.
than me doing it myself. So there's parts in Echolands that we do that too, and the raw cut editions that we're going to release will show that. Um, as an example, on the preview pages that have been shown, there is a couple characters on there. Like there's this like a science fiction-y guy wearing an orange jacket, and he's got this red helmet, and he's like eating a taco. He's painted on the board in
Oh
full
wow.
color. There's another like fantasy elf-like character that's got white long hair tucked down below the main panels. He's painted on the board, but I painted him in a different style than I painted the science fiction guy. And those are all purposeful decisions to reinforce the mashup world. So those characters feel different than anything Dave does.
Yeah.
So you see what I'm saying? There's other instances like issue 6, or issues 4, 5, and 6. The characters end up in a place where they meet this alien oracle. Alien oracle's fully painted on every shot. They end up getting a rocket ship, and that rocket ship is fully painted in every shot. But then there'll be some instances where I'm like, okay, no, I'm going to do the whole panel. Or there's some instances like in issue 6 where I do the entire double page spread myself. Just because I'm looking for something that I don't feel it's right to go round and round with him over. Try it myself. And it's a good experiment for myself and good learning lessons for myself to experiment that way. So I don't, every once in a while, it's good to kind of branch out and do something you don't normally do, So
I think we're already seeing why this particular project is taking the time that it's taking. We all appreciate it.
I hope people like it.
The end product is what matters. So whenever I look at something that you do with Dave, even going all the way back to Seven Soldiers, one of the things I think of is, if I look at the way the color is distributed through these pages, there's all sorts of ways this could go wrong, and yet it doesn't.
Right. I don't know how we've managed to pull that off. I know Grant Morrison, in an interview when Dave and I did Batman the Black Glove storyline, Grant joined me for a panel, And that was one of the first things he asked is like, how are you getting these characters to be in all these different styles, but yet they work together on the page? This is like, it seems so okay. Yeah, that works. What are you doing? And I was like, he's like, how are you doing that? And I'm like, I don't have an answer for that. I just do it. Like, you know, and he was, it was so funny because he was a little bit like, oh, come on. You got what's you're not, you're just being cagey now. But it's true. I don't know. I just do it. I just what feels right. And the result is pretty fascinating when you butt up characters that are in different styles and next to each other on how well they work, even in just black and white. And then when you put the color on top of it, it just reinforces that idea. But everyone feels like when they're a group of characters, you're just like, oh, right on. You know, it just feels like maybe because in some weird way, subconsciously, it adds to the personality of that character.
Yeah.
So you're able to like, oh yeah, that character's distinctly a different type of person than this character, just on the way we drew it and colored it, you know? So
That's a nice precursor to Echolands too, because it is kind of a jam.
yeah, very much.
Who else can we expect in the story to show up that could be an echo of existing templates and characters that we know?
Well, I think the thing that there's nothing that we purposefully have decided to have like as a callback to something that people know, except for maybe one character, but it's so tangential. It's not really pertinent. But there will be different things in the story that people can go, ah, that kind of reminds me of this, or reminds me of that. And those things is what kind of makes Echolands so fun, because yeah, there should be, because it is the Echolands, we do want things that are familiar or feel familiar, but it's being presented in a fresh new way to where you're like, ah, I can relate to this because it reminds me of something, but it's clearly not that thing that I'm being reminded of, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
The most direct one, there's a couple direct things. There's some black and white characters that are kind of inspired by old black and white horror comics. That's a little bit specific. But what we do with them isn't necessarily derivative of that. And then there's a character named Romulus. I don't think this is really not a spoiler, but completely inspired by Jack Kirby. So
okay.
So there's some things in there that people are like, I can pick that out. And it's on the nose, and our reference is on the nose on purpose, because we started out with wanting to do that. And then there's other things where you're like, oh, well, that is more of a blend, and the references are not so clear.
So Jack Kirby, that's not the first time you would be doing something inspired by Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also Romulus, does that mean there's a character called Remus?
I can't tell you that.
Would you mind if I shared my screen and we go through some of the preview pages?
Sure.
So this is the cover to Echolands #1.
Yes.
You got the credits right here, your first build, and then it's Hayden, and then Dave, and then Todd Klein. Even the image logo is part of the design, which I think is really cool. It is in landscape format. So my question there is it a regular comic book twisted sideways, or what are the dimensions of this?
The comic is the same size as a standard comic, but the staples are on the left. So the staples where the word Echo starts,
right here.
The staples are there.
Okay. And this is Hope Red Hood. Can you? Yeah. Would you mind describing what this weapon she's holding is?
I call it a fire lance, which is a term I kind of was inspired by and stole from Michael Moorcock. There's a character in one of his stories or series that uses a thing called a fire lance. And I just love the way that sounds. And this is a weapon she steals in the first issue and keeps.
And obviously the inspiration for this takes off of Little Red Riding Hood, but what about the rest of it? Like what inspired you to put on this one long glove and not put it on the other arm as well?
Yeah, that's going to be a thing that plays an important role later. So not much I can really say about it that wouldn't be spoilery, other than that there's a reason she has it.
Okay. Moving on to the next, we have the Raw Cut. Is this the villain?
Yes.
Whose name you're not mentioning yet?
I don't know if we should say what her name is yet.
It's okay.
She is the personal enforcer of the main villain.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
But her role in her arc and how she relates to Hope will be significant as we go along.
I think some places are calling this cover a variant cover, but it's not a variant cover, right? It's a Raw Cut. It's a different edition.
There's the regular version of the series has two covers. So there's a version of this cover in color.
Oh, okay.
And then this is the Raw Cut has the cover we just saw in a different layout. And then
okay.
This version here, this black and white version, which is, the black and white version of the variant cover.
Got it.
Yeah. So issue 1, there's two covers. The Raw Cut, there's two covers.
Is it challenging to draw a character with a full face mask on? You can't show the expressions.
Yeah, it is. But at the same time, it can be, you can get weird expressions out of characters that have a rigid mask through changing angle and lighting. Mm-hmm. This was something I learned on Batwoman. Granted, with Batwoman, we could show her mouth making different expressions, but in terms of her eyes, she really was expressionless. But by changing the angle and the lighting, you would get a sense of her emotion on her eyes, the way I would angle the mask. So with this character, it's kind of similar, lighting and angles to kind of get different impressions. The number one thing is with her is sort of the creepiness, because that permanent smile is there no matter what.
Yeah, no matter what's happening to her, she could be in pain and she'd still be smiling.
Correct.
I also like that she's also wearing a hood. That's nice imagery.
Literally
right there.
An echo of the first cover.
Yes, it's the first cover backwards. So this is one of the first preview pages that were shown. I have to tell you, I read this and instantly realized I needed to read this more.
Oh, cool.
I needed to read more of this.
Right on.
I like how the backstory that as listed isn't, it's detailed enough so that I kind of know what's going on, but it's not so detailed that I still want to know everything that happened.
Right.
And what can you tell us about this page? Like, this is her family life, and can you tell us who this is?
I can't really say who that is, other than obviously she hates him.
Yes.
Who that is going to play a big role involving the secret behind the Echolans. So there's nothing I can really say that's about that without being spoilery. The backstory elements here, what was fascinating about this page is when we wrote it, we didn't write it with we didn't necessarily write it with those individual scenes that we show there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, originally it was going to be just the text and everything we see to the right of those thought bubble images. But as I started working on it, I messaged Hayden and said, told him, like, I think I want to put these images in here. And here's how we could do it. Instead of it just being standard panels, these are the thoughts, the images going along with the thoughts she has about where she came from. And the result was kind of this interesting thing I stumbled on because of it, is doing these thought bubble images. Usually thought bubbles, when you see them in comics, or especially old comics, they're always text, right?
Yeah.
So this ends up becoming a device we use a few times here and there, where you get a peek inside what the character's envisioning. So that was pretty fascinating. But the result is a better first page because it's got so much movement, and allowed Dave to put these, rich, cool colors against the hot colors. Also allowed us to kind of show this idealized style for her childhood, which I was inspired by old Disney cartoons, actually. So,
Really?
yeah. So as an example, when you look at Snow White, the original Snow White, how the characters are drawn versus the backgrounds. The characters are done in this line art. It's elegant line art, but then everything in the backgrounds is painted. And so I wanted to kind of capture that effect with these images of her past.
I was gonna say, yeah, this is very clearly Snow White wasn't where my mind went to, but
Sure.
it kind of went to Studio Ghibli, but I mean that's kind of this
Interesting.
it's kind of the same concept there.
Yes. Yeah.
That is interesting. So once again, you're coming up with a different style for the flashbacks, and it is a mix. So it's like in Batwoman where Kate Kane is drawn one way and then Batman is drawn another way.
Yeah.
Very interesting. For the next page, I found this fascinating because there's a school of thought amongst some fans who are like, why would you make a panel that's just where there's really nothing in it? But I thought this looked so cool. So so the staples here would be in the middle, am I right?
Correct.
Okay. And so this is her running. So what would be the concept behind this page? She's running and she's what, leaving the past behind or something? Or
Okay, so essentially she's leaving. Yes. Okay, so the first page is the future. She's thinking about the past and kind of correlating the two about where she started and where she's going to be. And everything that comes after the first page is going to be events leading up to the future. We do this for each chapter. But what we wanted to do is have transition panels. So the movement from what you see on the first page and then what happens on the second page as we jump into quote unquote present day of the Echolands story, we didn't want it to be completely jarring. It needed to feel like it eases you into it. So that first page, you have all those hot colors and the red of her cloak dominating the right side. And as you turn to this page, that's all just the red anchoring you as she now moves into her story.
And if super technical question, how do you come up with a panel this shape? Like, is there a reason for it, or?
Yes, it's the number one.
Oh, right there. Okay. Yeah. I was looking here. Right. Okay. I understand. So
when you see issue 2, then you'll go, oh, right. Okay, there's a number, and you'll find it when you come back to this issue. So one of the things that we decided early on, I'll come back to this red bit too in a minute, but one of the things we decided early on was to not have any chapter names, because we knew that these were going to be very packed pages, and we didn't want anything to kind of crowd them in even further. Granted, we could put that on the inside front cover. I mean, this is an image book. We could do that if we want, but we decided not to do that, and just really break it down into the simple as possible. And so one of the things we're doing is each issue, the issue number plays a role in its layout construction. So, this is chapter 1, so we used a 1. Issue 2, we'll use a number 2. But every time I do it, I do it in a different way. So it becomes part of the design element. Which I don't know. I just thought that'd be kind of fun to do. And now back to the red here. One of the things, my favorite things about this page, and I'm amazed at how effective it was, is we're dealing with 3 different, these middle panels here. We're dealing with 3 different images of Hope as she's moving, running away from us into the background. But when you follow the line of the cape, it's one cape.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And
so it's one background and it's one cape.
Yes, even though we have 3 figures of her. And the reason why I did that was to reinforce the movement of the entire thing. Because when Hayden and I wrote it, that wasn't necessarily what I was going to do. That was a decision I made, at the time of drawing it. And I thought it was a good idea to do it that way, because I felt like trying to draw 3 different capes would have slowed the image down.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have taken away from that transition feeling of moving from what we just saw into where we're going to take you, if that makes sense.
That is absolutely cool. And also, if you had drawn 3 different capes, she'd have to be smaller in each panel, wouldn't she?
Yes. Yeah.
So this also gives you the feeling of moving further away from the reader.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it also acts as a directional device too. When you look at it, it's sort of like a big giant red arrow. You have no choice but to move from left to right. I tried to find different ways to do that in various parts of the series.
I think there's a lot of things that fans just kind of take for granted. Like, for example, here you use a bleed. And I think a lot of fans will, don't understand that it actually takes thought to decide to go with a bleed in this case. But in this case, it is necessary.
Yeah. Because
especially
carrying over from that first page, because one of the things, since we're dealing with a landscape book, my number one thought about the layouts is flow, that left to right flow. And it reinforces pulling from what you just were in and carrying it through to here. So like this continuation feeling, even though we're moving into a different time.
I am sad I missed the number 1, though. I was looking at this panel.
Oh, that's okay.
I was like, that's an interesting looking panel. I think the number 2 will be a lot more obvious.
Oh yeah, very obvious.
And then this is
there will be people go, why didn't he do that in the first issue?
Oh, he did. So I thought this one was, this is one of those things that I was saying was, if I just describe this to anyone, there's all sorts of ways this could go wrong. But I can read this page perfectly. And I think one of the things that you do is you make sure that Hope goes in one very specific straight direction. Yeah.
She's this red arrow moving through the whole thing.
And no one else is red here. Well, very few people are red in this image. And if anyone is, like the sci-fi guy, they're very far from where she is.
Yeah. Very different color red too.
So this is our very first taste of what Echolands really is. It's a mashup of different genres, different worlds. You have 3 black and white figures over here, and they're even drawn differently. How long does it take you to draw one of these?
On which part?
Like, let's say this spread. Was this like a month?
This spread probably took me 7 days.
7 days.
Yeah.
That's quicker than I thought it would take. There's a lot of stuff on this page. And
it's like putting together, when doing something like this is like putting together a puzzle in a way. But the end result is cool. It looks like it almost has like a mural like quality to it.
it feels like a mural, and it is interesting that she's walking through here. This is a whole other panel, but just like from a glance, it kind of looks like one of those continuous backgrounds too. Like if you're just glancing really
Yes.
quickly, then you realize
Yes.
it's not. You're continually shifting angles. I thought that was interesting. Now, does anyone on this page uh make a return appearance later on?
Yes. Very briefly.
Okay.
They don't meet a very good end.
Well, with that
You'll
hint, I
recognize
hope
them when
it's
you'll
I hope,
recognize them when they show up. You'll be like, oh, that guy looks familiar.
well, with that hint, I hope it's the giant hamburger who doesn't meet a very good end. May not be a very good end for the giant hamburger, but it's a very good end for us. So this is this looks like a really promising, really wonderful, fantastical set of pages. And I can't wait to see Echolands. So with that, is there anything else you'd like to say about this particular spread?
um, I don't think so. Other than there's so many things going on here that I made like dumb mistakes where like I would leave a detail off. So like her little bracelet that she's got on, I had to put in separately because I forgot to draw it on. So
when that
it had
when
already
that
been
happens,
colored.
what do you do? Like, is it a thing where you're like, did I forget something, and then you just can't you just
Yeah,
can't figure out
yeah.
what it is?
And I kept telling myself, I'll come back to it. I'll come back to it. I'll fix it. And then Dave ends up coloring it, and it's with the error. And so I just had him send me the high res color file, and I drew the bracelet on a piece of paper, scanned it, colored it, and popped it in myself. So
Do you still use model sheets, or
no, that's probably part of my problem.
because I was gonna say, did you do model sheets for all of these guys?
Yeah, no. I probably should have, but I have really bad habits when that's concerned, and I just tend to go like, oh well, I can't remember what did I do over here, and I'll go and look at the page. So yeah, I end up making little mistakes. As an example, like when you look at the cover, uh, the satchel she's got it slung over a different shoulder than what she has here. And I
Yeah.
always have it like this than what I did on the cover. So like little things like that, I'm like, oh, I'm not matching. But again, it's just a satchel, but it's like one of those little weird continuity things that, you know.
Well, I'll tell you, I found that one of the key audiences for my show is artists who are trying to work their way up, aspiring artists, trying to learn more from you guys. And I think it'll relieve them to know that you're human. So with that, I can't wait for Echolands. My last question is, as of May 20, 2021, according to the Hollywood Reporter, you are midway through issue 7. I assume you're more than a little midway through issue 7 because that was 2 months ago. Does, does the yeah.
I think I was just starting issue 7 when we did that. They published that right after we did the interview. So yeah, I'm still in the middle of issue 7. And issue 7 and 8, there's parts of it that are insanely time consuming. There's a sequence at the end of issue 6 that without giving away any spoilers, what I'm doing there stylistically is very particular to one of the characters. And those pages are taking me nearly 2 weeks per set of for 2 pages.
Oh,
so they're
wow.
very time consuming. So there's huge parts of issues because it's so time consuming. We ended up kind of changing our tactic on way we wrote those issues, actually, because originally those issues were going to be completely immersed in that style. Now, after doing a few pages of it, I was like, no, we gotta, this eats up too much time. We have to find a way to break it up And so we inserted scenes that weren't originally going to be there, so we could break it up, stuff that can be drawn a little bit quicker. But yeah, so issue 7 and 8, there's sequences that are just crazy time consuming. They're like, 100% fully rendered.
So to everyone watching, if you thought that spread we showed was super detailed, wait till issues 7 and 8.
Yeah.
Does the book have a definite end?
We know we're going with the story, but we don't know when we'll get there. We're keeping ourselves open. We didn't want to give ourselves a definitive time frame to get to where we want to go, which is probably a good thing because it allows us to explore things that really should be explored, like with some of the other characters and things like that we hadn't considered. Like there's one of the characters, this thing happens to one of the characters and they end up on their own trajectory from everyone else, but plays an important role later. So there's parts that we've come up with that we hadn't originally intended to write, where we follow that character in different scenarios, stuff like that. So, and it's one of those, hopefully it's successful enough and we'll be able to tell our story all the way through. That's going to depend a lot on people reading. They have to buy it and read it.
So you know that people will be reading it, and some of them will be waiting for the trades. So my question there is, how do you collect this into a trade?
The
Will it just be?
It'll be sideways.
It will be sideways.
Yeah.
Are you worried about the binding cutting off the middle of your spread?
No, because I'm going to ask for sewn binding.
Okay.
So it should open up wide. So yeah, shouldn't be any gutter loss. We haven't talked about that part yet with Image, other than I've said this is how it should be, and the people who handle that side of Image are like, yes, so
we'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. But it's going to be a sizable book because right now, because of all the back matter stuff, I think each issue is sitting around 40 plus pages. So they're thick books. Cardstock laminated covers, I should say. So it's we did that because we kind of want the covers to work both directions, horizontally or vertically. So that's why one of the reasons why the logo reads the way it does.
And why she's diagonally placed.
What's that?
And that's why she's diagonally placed.
Correct. To my eye, it works best horizontally, her form, but it can work if you turn it this way vertically, because then it looks like she's dropping down.
Yeah.
So we did that because of concern over retailers wanting to rack the book with all the other books. So it gives them the option to do that. That's another reason why we went with thick cardstock covers, very sturdy covers. So because the staples will make the book kind of top heavy, but by using cardstock covers, hopefully the physics of that will keep the books from being weird and they can just sit upright like a normal comic. Whether we continue to worry about that past the first arc, I don't know. After the first arc, we might just say, no, you're just going to have, it's going to be, except that it's landscapes now. Surprisingly, I haven't gotten any pushback about it. Because I know some retailers get weird when you're dealing with unusual formats. Our local retailer here, Alternate Reality Comics, he's excited over the format. So like whenever he talks to people about the book is coming out, he's like, it's going to be like this, and I've been around a few times when he's talked to readership in there, and everyone seems enthused about that, which is surprising. I thought for sure I would be getting pushback at this point, We'll see when more people see what it actually is.
We're used to you working in double page spread, so it's only the natural evolution of your work. Plus, it's not like it's like Acme Novelty Library and impossible to put in a bookshelf or something.
Well, the funny thing is about the format, it's so difficult to work with, and it's a challenge every spread because you're dealing it with the dimensions being different. So you have to think differently when drawing it, and even writing it, you have to think differently. Even though it's so challenging and difficult, it has spoiled me in a way. So like when I did the Batman black and white pages last year, I was spoiled by working on Echolands. I wanted them all to be extra wide. And yeah, so it's like, it's such a strange thing. And I've done this other thing that's a short eight page thing that I can't talk about yet. That I conceived it with my wife, Wendy. And as I was drawing it and laying it out, even she was coming in and she's like, I want it to be like this. It needs to be, why can't it be like Echolans? So it does spoil you once you get used to how that feels, that wide, that if you're looking for something that feels broad and epic, it really suits that very well.
It's like going back to 4:3, coming from 16:9.
Yeah,
coming from widescreen. Where's the rest of the picture?
Exactly. Where it makes it the most challenging, and particularly in the writing stage, is understanding, because it's widescreen, pages technically are more squat. So information fits differently. Even the amount of text that's on the page fits differently. And so that becomes a big consideration. And so when we're figuring out the text placement, that's when I started going, oh, why did we choose this format? Why did we do this to ourselves? It'd be so much easier. That text would fit so much easier if the page was shaped like this.
Innovating comics again. My last question is, you're definitely going to get people coming up to you asking if they can play in the world of Echolands, and is that something you would be open to in the future?
Like, what do you mean?
Like maybe, oh, like I like this one aspect of Echolands. Can I do a little spin-off series or a backup story?
Oh, I see. That's something we haven't really thought about. I mean, we've thought about other Echolands tales that we would like to tell. So like, let me backtrack a little bit and explain what I mean. So Echolands, the series, is basically going to be the entire character arc of Hope and the people that surrounds her. But they all come from different places. They all have backgrounds and stories that we could dive into. And easily could see ourselves, doing little spin-off tales here and there, depending on the success of the project. It could go on forever. And we've kind of designed it to be able to function that way, where it could go on forever if we wanted it to, in some form or another. As far as other creators coming in and playing around, that's something we hadn't thought about. And it wasn't so, I guess maybe because, this was so like, this is our baby.
Yeah.
And it's so particular that it was hard to picture someone else doing anything with it right now. Maybe later we could see that. But at the same time, I could also say, like, well, that's such a, I want to tell that story. But, you never know. And I hadn't thought about other artists, even weirdly, even though it's such a mashup genre book, I hadn't thought about other artists doing their interpretations of things until we had a business meeting with Image, and Eric Stevenson was looking for different things to do with Echolands. That's how the Raw Cut came up. Is he was looking to what unique thing could we do for such a unique series, and so that's how the Raw Cut thing came about. But one of the other things he brought up is he's like, have you considered doing variant covers? Originally, that was not in the cards, and he was originally not wanting variant covers either. But then, for whatever reason, he thought maybe we should consider it, and that opened up a whole can of worms. Because I'm like, if Eric Stevenson is saying, "Hey, we should consider variant covers," I'm going to take that seriously. and want to make him happy with any ideas he has for support of the project. But then I started thinking about, oh, well, if we do variant covers, do I do them? Or do we bring in a different artist to do them? If we bring a different artist to do it, how do we do that? Because the series is so particular that I can't just pick any artist to draw whatever, at least not in the first arc, at the first stages. It has to be very, very consciously decided, because everything we're doing inside is so particular. Styles chosen are so particular. So I can't say, hey, can you draw core and just expect it to look right if it's not the right artist drawing core, because core's style in the book is so particular. It's a great example. But as I started to think more about it, I started thinking about different artists that I like. One of the things that Eric had said to me, he's like, if we do variant covers, he's like, think about picking artists, asking artists that, or people you like, friends of yours or acquaintances that you get along with, whatever, people that you have a connection with. So I started there, and then I started thinking about, oh, you know what? That person's style lines up with this character very nicely, even though they would handle it differently than I do. You could still see the dots connected. And so the first issue 2, we have Allison Sampson doing a variant cover. We've been able to show that, and she did core, and she was a great choice. Like when she showed me her cover, I'm like, oh, well, of course, I knew you would be the right choice. I knew it in my head, in my heart, that you were right. And every artist that we've picked for each of the variant covers has been the exact right artist for the character we're spotlighting. So like we have Mike Oming is doing one. He ended up, when he did the character that I wanted him to do, pitch perfect. It's exactly right, and we've had that luck with each of the 5 variant artists that we have. So when you think about that in relation to your question, I could easily see any of those artists coming in and doing a tale centered on that character that I pictured them being connected to, if that makes sense.
Very cool.
So, yeah.
Very cool. Mr. Jim Williams, I cannot wait for Echolands. I'm sure a lot of fans cannot wait for Echolands. Some of these fans include, Neil Gaiman and Debbie Harry, which has been an amazing campaign on social media that, you're showing all of these people that have read Echolands and have nothing but good things to say about it. So good luck. Congratulations. And I'm sure it will succeed even beyond your wildest expectations.
Let's hope so. It has to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.